Sure.
Hey, kids, how are you doing?
How's it going today? That's all we need.
Oh, how are you today, kid?
Oh, not too bad.
Oh, sure. Oh,
Must be
sure.
from one of your dogs.
Must be
Here, you
with
can
that
have
word. Okay.
Computerized.
Yeah.
see I saw that on you.
It's probably missing a poodle.
Okay, so we will entertain a motion to return to open session.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion made by Alderman Busker, made by Alderman Brashaw, seconded by Alderman Busker to return to open session. Madam Clerk, could you please take the roll?
Clem.
Aye.
McLanathan.
Aye.
Ross.
Aye.
Parker.
Aye.
Busker.
Aye.
Brashaw.
Aye.
Keister.
Aye.
And Berberay. Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you. Item number 6 is a motion for adjournment.
So move. Second. Bless you.
We have a motion made by Alderman Parker, seconded by Alderman Busker for adjournment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That motion passes. So we will immediately go into the next meeting. Pastor Steve, would you start us with the invocation, please?
So we're in a season of hope, and I know sometimes the way that you guys serve, it gets all mussed up in the actuality of what you have to do to support the community. But I want to give you some hope. The scriptures say in 1 Peter 3 that it is better to suffer for doing good if it's God's will than for doing evil. So there's going to be persecution against what you guys are doing. You're going to make some tough decisions. You're going to affect a long generations to come based upon decisions that you're going to make about things now. And it is better to suffer. There's going to be suffering that's going to take place no matter what way you go. And it's better to suffer for the good than for the evil. So I want to encourage you to embrace the grace of God that is going to bring a hope to you, knowing that making the right decisions, you are doing something that is incredibly important for our region. And so, Father, right now I pray over these precious folks that they have access to, and that they are experiencing your grace as they make the decisions that are necessary in order to advance our great region. Father, I thank you that the hearts of those folks right here that are serving this community, that are taking on difficult conversations and difficult topics. Father, I thank you that you're giving them strength, you're giving them wisdom, you're giving them understanding about how their decisions can affect untold generations to come. So, Father, I thank you that there is an incredible heart that is amongst this folk. And I bless them now in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So now that it is after 6 o'clock, we'll officially call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, could you please take the roll?
Mayor Miller.
Here.
Clem.
Here.
McLanathan.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Parker.
Here.
Busker.
Here.
Brashaw.
Here.
Keister.
Here.
And Berberay.
Could you please stand with us for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Alderman Brashaw?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Alderman, if it would be okay, I'd like to ask for a leave of counsel. Captain Jim Brixon would like to do a little presentation if you're all good with that. Captain Jim? No, you just go right ahead.
Probably better.
So, first of all, I appreciate all of you for giving me this couple minutes. We haven't done this before, this part. However, the Chiefs have had this ongoing battle of bronze at Walmart. And Walmart's a tough place to be for, I guess, the men are men there. So in 2016, the chief challenge happened. I don't know how many years you've been doing it, but the police department in natural form with their guns won. But Miller on his way out the door put $20 in the kettle, so we had to recount, and they won for 2016. Last year, the police department won by a landslide, again, by natural consequence, I think. This year, city manager's son, Crow, busted a bell, so we had to make a trophy out of it. So this is a monumental bell. I've never broke a bell in 20 years. This isn't just broke, it was shattered, so I don't know about them volleyball players. But this year, really not a winner or a loser, is it? Because the Salvation Army, the community really benefits for this. So if you guys still have not rang or have some more time to ring, know that your Salvation Army did 40,000 meals last year, hot meals over here. Their vital impact on this community is above all, 3,700 food pantry orders. This funding that we get from this time pays for all that. So although it's a battle of wit, Alan brought in the Santa Claus this year. Police department brought in a donut.
A donut.
Their departments worked so hard, and they had such a good time out there. And it was a good thing they had a call up there. They didn't have to go very far, so the gas went down, fuel that day. So the difference between the two for the 8-hour period was $20.14. That's what split the two. So what I'm saying, right now you can write a check. $21 will do it. $870.17 was raised by the fire department.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I don't know if they potted the thing or what, but thanks, Chief.
Yeah,
Appreciate
hey,
it.
no problem, no
Chief's
problem.
been pretty big on, well, we gotta take this off. No,
Okay, yep.
you know that you gotta give that back to the police department next year. When
That's right, when we win, when we win.
That's right, that's right.
We'll be back.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Captain. I will now turn this meeting over to Alderman Brashaw.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank Captain Brickson and also the Chair of the Board of Directors, Cal Westcott. Thank you for coming, gentlemen. We'll move on to the approval of the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Parker and a second by Alderman Keister. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. No public comment, sir? Thank you. Next, I'm going to ask for the approval of minutes from the Committee of the Whole meeting held on November 13th, 2018. Motion
So move.
by Alderman Keister,
Second it.
second by Alderman Ross. Thank you, gentlemen. I was told there are no public comments. Oh, excuse me. Back to the approval of the minutes. All those in favor, council?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. No public comments, so we'll move on to number 7, which is the presentation on police and firefighters pension funding opportunity. This will be presented by Robert W. Baird and Company, and you all should have reviewed the presentation that was in your packets. Gentlemen, if you'd please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Stephen Roberts from Robert W. Baird and Company. So you do have the presentation book. You don't need copies. Okay.
Just make sure, is there anybody else that is there anybody that needs a copy?
I'd like to have one. I didn't bring mine.
Nice color copies.
Yeah.
Do you-
Thank you.
Yeah, I sent it,
Council, most of you have saw this online. I didn't print it up because there is so much color copy, and I'm sure some of you didn't print it up as well.
Thank you. If you have the extra one, I'll take it. We'll let that black and white one here.
If you have extras, okay. Thank you.
I'm good, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts.
Can I steal your lunch?
Oh, absolutely.
So I know you have been briefed on your pension systems, and where I'm going to start is on page 2. And the city of Freeport has an unfunded police liability of 25.5 and a firefighters of 18.5, and that's a total of $6.4 million in liabilities. So how we're going to start out thinking about this is what you've done in the past is like a bond refinancing. And what you're doing is replacing higher liabilities, debt, with lower interest rates. And at the beginning of this, I think that's the easiest way to consider this. So we're estimating, right now you're paying 6 3/4 on those 44 million in liabilities.
The brief is up there first. Let's see. That's not it.
This one?
I think that's it.
Mr. Roberts, again, what was that percentage we're paying currently?
6 3/4, 6.75%.
I see it, thank you.
It's on page 2 also.
Yep.
There we go. So what we estimate is that you could go into the taxable bond market and borrow at just under 5%. We did your last bond deal, so we have a pretty good idea where you guys would trade in the taxable market, and we're estimating 5% on a conservative basis. So what does that do? That generates savings, anticipated expected savings, because as I go through this presentation, I'm going to say, you know, this is like a bond refunding, but it isn't, because there's additional risk associated with this deal, and we want to have full disclosure here. But if we think about it as a mortgage refi, as a bond refunding, it generates expected savings of, we're estimating, $6.3 million in interest cost over the amortization period, which is 21 years. Below you see us, we presented basically the statistics on the systems, the valuation date. The last one we used was May 1st of 2018. As I mentioned, the liability in total is 44 million. Funded ratio in the police is 48%. Fire, 65, a little above 65. And in Illinois, we're seeing interest, or at least communities want to find out about this, because you're seeing this across the state. You're seeing low percentages. We just completed a deal with your financial advisor for Winnebago County that basically was similar to this transaction. So you're seeing interest because of these low funding levels and for what you're paying on the liability. Payroll growth assumption, and I don't want to go, I'm not an actuary. We have one here, but I should mention that the payroll growth assumption is 3.25, and that's going to be important when we start to look at your payment pattern. And I mentioned the period closed system, 23 years. So what is this? You have, as I mentioned, a liability of $44 million. So you pay it down while paying interest, and in that middle column, it's the annual payment to amortize your unfunded. And I mentioned I'm not an actuary, but we're pretty close. So this would, if you guys chose to take this approach, we would recommend engaging an independent actuary, or your actuary actually, to help model this side of it, but this gives you the story. If you look in 2018, your payment is right around 2.7 to amortize this liability. And what do you see through time is to 2040, that you see an upward sloping curve, and we estimate in 2040 that your payment will be $5.4 million. It'd look like this. So a lot of issuers look at this and see that the slope is up, and if you went out even further, it'd be exponential, because you're putting a percentage on a percentage, and that payroll growth assumption is one of the factors driving that curve up. So that, in a nutshell, is what's facing communities in this state, is this curve. So I'm gonna, if you were to do a taxable bond issue, as I mentioned, we estimate that the city could save right around $300,000 in generate expected savings of $300,000 annually, and that aqua color is the savings that would be generated. But let's get to this. I apologize about how small that is. I can't even see it. But what we did is the annual payment to amortize the unfunded is that column, the third from the left. And then what we do is put the taxable bond issue beside it. And you can see the average interest rate of 4.98%. And in that box, assumed savings is the estimated savings we are estimating you could generate by doing this, using this approach. And then in the box below, it says savings of 44 million in total gross savings. PV, present value, to the city today is 4.4 or 9.95%. Now, when I say we should think of it as a bond refunding, I think your internal, and Randy, you can disagree with me, but I think it's 3% on a bond refunding. That would basically be, you guys would move forward if it was more than that, and less, you probably wouldn't. That's pretty standard throughout the state. This is north of that, 9.95%. But I would argue it should be more because there is additional, when we get in later, additional risk associated with this way of doing it. I'm gonna go back to this curve because a lot of issuers will look at that and say, great, that's, Stefan, you've generated savings, but you haven't fixed the problem. And what's the problem? Is that your payments are doubling and tripling over the period of time. So a lot of issuers, almost all of them that have decided to go forward, said this isn't good enough. We need to fix the problem while doing the bond issue. And that's what we're going to present, is a more level debt service. And that's what Winnebago chose to do. We've been engaged in Pekin do this, is they want to fix it by leveling that and taking that upward slope and making it flat. You're able to do that. You have more flexibility with a bond issue to do that. And we already talked, the third bullet there is payments are estimated to go from 2.7 to 5.4, but you could forego the savings early on and generate slightly more savings by being more conservative, because this is the more conservative of the options. And this is what it would look like. So now you can see that that level savings has now become, you don't see savings until later, and then you see them increasing, because what you've done is you see the flat payment structure that has eliminated that upward curve. And this is what it would look in numbers wise. You can see assumed savings, we structured it as $4,000 under a bond out until we generate $31,000, and on the far end we get to $1.6 million. That would be PV savings of 4.6 or 10.55. So as you know, on the prior one, I estimated above 9, and now it's goosed it up a little bit to 10.55. Benefits to the city of this, and these are, I don't know if I have to go through them because they're pretty obvious. Biggest one is you generate expected savings right around or over $6.3 million. You're taking that 6 3/4, that 6.75%, and replacing it with interest rates of 5%. The third bullet, it replaces one existing legal obligation with another. Because in the past, a lot of governments looked and were, they're not a finance term, but loosey-goosey about it. They'd take pension holidays, they wouldn't fund it up, and that gets them into a lower funded status, and that's what we're seeing across the state. So you're not increasing your obligations. You're, again, trading one for another. Rating agency treatment for the city's very important, and they're neutral if you do it right. You can't do it for what's called debt service or for budgetary reasons. That one issuer did it and got a 3-notch downgrade. You have to plan it. You have to show the rating agency that you've thought through this, you know the risk, and you've mitigated them. And a great example is, again, Winnebago. They're a AA2, and they were affirmed at AA2 because we, the financial advisor, and us showed them here's some ways to do it, and the biggest conservative way to do it is to level debt service, where you're actually making this obligation flat versus seeing that increase. That's very important in this process. And last benefit I mentioned is you're taking what we call in the industry the hurdle rate from 6.75% to 4.98%. Risk. And I keep mentioning, let's think about this as a bond refunding, but there is additional risk associated with this. And the chief risk is the first one. And simply, that 4.98%, what we're calling the hurdle rate, if you, over the life of the bond issue, 23 years, earn less on average than the 4.98%, you shouldn't have done the transaction. You're going to lose money. If you earn more than that, you're going to generate savings. If you earn the 6 3/4, the 6.75%, over the life of the bonds, it's the savings I presented. And if you earn more than that, the savings would be higher than I presented. But that, in a nutshell, is the chief risk of the transaction, is the interest rates. I put some other ones in there, is, POBs are hard liabilities. You have to make debt service payments. Pension payments, I would argue, in Illinois law currently, are hard liabilities because you have to be 90% funded by 2040. In the past, you didn't have to do that. So you could take pension holidays, you could do other things. So, but I would argue you're going to have liabilities on either side of the ledger. I was talking to your actuary before, and I need to say, additional unfunded can open up even if you do this bond issue. So you could be a year, find there's another unfunded, but that's a risk you have now. If you did nothing, you could open up additional unfunded. And we are not touching your normal costs because that would be considered for budgetary reasons. So this, we're not talking normal costs. You'd still have to pay the normal costs. What we're talking about is the liability, the debt you have of $44 million.
One thing, so the council understands, Rainey and I've run the numbers, normal costs would be between 1 million and 1.2 million as we have as the actuarial is right now outside of the unfunded liability. And that was, we looked at those numbers, and I see the actuary shaking his head yes and up and down, so those are good figures.
The normal cost represents the present value of benefits.
Please speak only from the podium so it's on recorded. Thank you.
The normal cost represents the present value of benefits being earned by all the active officers and firefighters. So each year they earn additional year of service. There's a cost associated. That's what the normal cost piece is. So that's going to be continuing to go forward. And those, like you mentioned, that's between 1.1, 1.2 million right now. That will still increase as you bring on new officers and as their pay increases. Those numbers will still ratchet up a little bit in the future as well. So those are items to keep in mind when you are considering the normal cost. That is going to be kind of on that same upward slope that you would see excuse me, on the unfunded liability piece that was shown. You're still going to have a slight upward slope on that piece as well.
That was my presentation, so any questions?
Council?
Madam Chair,
Alderman Keister.
several questions if I may. Number one, if I understand this correctly, we'll be doing a bond issue and we wouldn't actually be paying it, but we would be investing it and using that to make annual payments for the pension. Is that correct?
The money, the 44 million would be bonded for and at closing would be deposited into the pension systems. So that 6.75 I mentioned would disappear because you wouldn't have then that liability. You would just be paying interest on the bonds.
Okay, and follow up?
Yes.
With this payment with the bond and stuff, will we, can't talk tonight. Will we have additional pension liabilities that aren't covered by this bond that we'll be having to pay on an annual basis? I.e., we budget the bond, we're making X payment, but all of a sudden things go up and we got to make Y payment. Is that a realistic goal?
Well, as I mentioned, future unfundeds, and if you want to jump into, is can open up. But the argument behind this is you have an existing $44 million liability debt.
Mm-hmm.
So if future ones open up, theoretically, by doing this bond issue, you'd be in a better position because they would have opened up anyway, and you'd be on the entire corpus, entire amount, you'd be paying the 6.75 versus the additional portion at 6.75, but the bond issue is at 4.98%. Is that a good way.
Yeah, the money that comes in will go into each police and fire fund separately, and those boards are responsible for investing those funds based on the funding policies and investment procedures that they have established. Currently, right now, there is, according to statute, they're limited to 65% in equity, 35% in bonds, and however they choose to do that, there are some limitations as well, but that's the general guidelines that they have to go by. Now, that 6.75% interest rate that these liabilities are being valued at, if you don't return 6.75% in the market in that first particular year example, you're no longer going to be 100% funded. You will have a new unfunded liability that pops up, which could create another increased payment to pay off that, to amortize that piece down again by the 2040 standard. And if, for example, you returned above that 6.75, you have actuarial gains that take place. It wouldn't minimize the funding of the normal costs. You still have to pay that. You just would not have an unfunded liability piece that you would have to pay for in the future.
Okay, one final follow-up then, please.
Manager Crowe, and then a follow-up, if you
Okay,
don't mind.
thank you.
So one of the things that when Stefan presented this to Randy and I, he asked us to go back and look at what our return has been over the last 10 years. And because he wanted to incorporate the bad years between 2008 and currently. And we still got a return of about 6.22% over that period of time. So that's what the council should be aware of, that we still got that 6.22%. We didn't get the 6.75, but we still got 6.22.
Which would mean that this would save money, this approach. But we can't guarantee future results, but if those are what you got over the life of the bonds, savings would be generated from this approach.
Alderman Keisha, your
Thank you.
follow-up.
And the final question is probably for Manager Crowe. I'm presuming that since we use the property tax for paying off these pensions, and it will no longer be used for that, that is what's going to be used to pay for the bond and secure the bond?
That is correct.
Okay,
But we still leave that we have enough to cover basically the bond payments this year, and then it would continue to increase, but we still have to pay the 1.1 or 1.2 million out there. So we would still need to come up with a revenue source for that.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman McClanathan.
Thank you. Looking at your figures for the UAL, are we dealing with the actuarial 100% funding assumption for those?
Yes.
Okay. Could I have some follow-up questions as well? Thank you. And again, the 3.25% payroll growth is built into the actuarial figures. How often are we reviewing that 3.25% and making adjustments accordingly?
Typically, as a firm at Lauterbach and Amon, we do an experience study every 5 years in which we survey all the police and fire pension funds that we do, nearly 350 funds. We do an experience study of where everybody's at and kind of what's happening in the market. Individually, we look at the actual salary contracts that are in place for police and fire funds and come up with our own individual rates. And then as a salary growth rate, which is a little bit different than an individual growth rate in the sense that salary growth rates are typically less than an individual participant may experience just due to the fact of the growth rate takes into account attrition, retirements, older, higher paid employees being replaced by younger, less paid. So that rate's typically a little bit lower. So we usually see that rate within 3 to 3.5% with not much fluctuation outside of that range. Okay. It's not going to be something that's going to spike really high or drop really low. It's going to be within that, probably 3 to 3.5% for a long term.
Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. You mentioned a little bit on Winnebago maintaining their rating, and in your presentation, you generally said that this impact on bonds is neutral. However, you also said it's not necessarily neutral. Talk to us a little bit more as to, you said they want to see that you're mitigating the risk, but generally speaking, is it more detrimental to have this as a bond liability as opposed to a pension liability for audits, for ratings and things of that nature, and how do you mitigate that risk to not negatively impact your credit?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think we were in there last year talking about this with Winnebago, and we developed things, and I'll go to one, is first, not taking savings first up front.
Okay.
And that's budgetary. The rating agency will see a red flag, and especially if you do the level debt service where you're taking savings beyond, let's be frank, political careers, that it's not political consideration, it's what's good for the city. Second is a budget stabilization fund. And rating agencies like to see that, and that's simply that you would borrow. Winnebago did this. Theirs was a bit smaller than yours, but they did about $1 million for budget stabilization. And what that meant was that it would be held in trust. And let's say that, as he said, you had the first year you were below the 5%. You don't want to be hit with an additional tax levy, so that would stabilize your budget. You would take from that, and you would basically have your levy and those monies available. But in a good year, you could replenish it. So basically, it's telling rating agencies that you've thought through this and that you're not going to take short-term hits. Third, I encourage all of you to Google pension bonds, because the press, especially City of Chicago, considered it, and when City of Chicago does anything, people look. And it's important to be comfortable with it. IGFOA, which is the organization that Randy's in, governmental officials recommend against it because of the first risk that I have up there. Then the rest of them, the risk are swaps. We're not talking swaps. There's a lot of other. So what we did is we recommended for Winnebago and our other clients, adopt a pension funding policy when you do this. And simply, I could share it with you. It acknowledged the risk, that you understand it, that you seek to mitigate it with either a flat debt service structure, with a budget stabilization fund. It also says you're not going to do swaps, you're not going to get in undue risky investments, and we provide that to the rating agency. So I guess to summarize, they like to see that you've thought it through, that this isn't a banker coming in and saying, look at this candy you can get, and you reached for it. It's that we understand the risk, we think it's a good risk, a prudent risk, and the rating agencies, when you do that, start to say, you're replacing, and this kind of goes to your last question, one liability with another. My argument would be they view no differently from, well, look at the downgrades been suffering across the state, from the Quad Cities to Chicago because of their unfunded pensions. So there has to be a solution, and as a banker, bonding is not always the solution. This makes a bad situation better, potentially. So they want to say, okay, you have the liability, you have a new liability, but you're taking a prudent approach to this, and that's how they come out neutral on it. Because they're not going to say, though, this is great. You know, pension bonds are will save you.
Chair,
Yes, Alderman McClanathan.
staying in the same field of question here, let's say that we go on to this, and now we've got, $44 million in bond and debt in there. And if we were pursuing any other form of bonding, how is that going to? I know you said you can mitigate it so it doesn't impact your credit rating, but let's say we were to pursue bonding for X, out there. In addition on that, is this going to basically hamstring our ability to do so? From the agencies that would be looking at that?
Well, there's legal tests in your home rule currently, so you don't have limitations. But I think your question's going more to the sticker price, is that, yes, if you were doing a $44 million for anything other than an existing liability that you're making better, for instance, a city hall, they might say that's a lot of money for Freeport. But you have this debt now, $44 million. So it's replacing it versus we're adding new debt on for X, Y, or Z.
They largely view it the same, basically. They largely view it the same because it's already existing.
Exactly.
It was existing over on the pension liability versus the debt.
Correct. Correct.
Yes.
Does somebody else want to pop in here? I got a few more.
Good.
Okay. Then what happened? There's been a lot of talk about consolidating downstate pension systems and debt. Now, it hasn't gone anywhere, you know, at this time, but let's say 2, 3, 4 years down the road, something like that happens. And meanwhile, we've put ourselves in this situation. How is that going to impact us? Could we potentially, and I know I'm asking you to, a real theoretical, but theoretically speaking, if we try to get our house in order and they do consolidation for all the downstate systems, could we be dealing with our debt payments plus now we're having new mandates to shore up all these other systems that are in the 20, 25% funding when they came in? Is that a risk?
From my understanding, again, it speaks to which exact possible outcome is out there. And of the different rules and things that are being proposed, there's a number of them. First and foremost, the ones that I've heard would be most impacted would be the small funds. The under $2.5 million funds would be the first ones that would be included in sort of a consolidation type basis. But going forward, really, it would be the assets now go under control of the state. So your pension boards aren't really controlling the investments of those anymore. You'll still have an actuary calculating your liabilities under the assumptions we use and all those sorts of things. So it is still possible if the investment returns that you're not getting from the state level are not equivalent to your current 6.75%. For example, when the state does their IDOI annual report this year, they're using an interest rate of 6.5%. For all Category 4 funds like the size of these plans. So you're using 6.5%. So right off the bat, if they did a consolidation and kept the discount rate calculated at 6.5%, right away you would see an increase in your unfunded liability because of that 25 basis point change, which would then therefore increase your future funding required from the city to pay down that new unfunded that could be created.
So it's possibly.
It is possible.
I mean, I know it's very
possible.
speculative at this time.
And that's just one of the potential consolidation bills that are out there. And, you know, depends on which way that's going to go or if it's going to sit stagnant for a number of years. We don't really have a good idea on that.
So I guess bottom line for us looking at this, if we hit, you know, the 4.98, if let's say that's what it is for on our rate, if we go through the kind of more the flat level on it, where it goes up for a bit and then flattens out, most of those savings are projected, like you said, well past our political life, which is fine. But if we're having any year that we're getting below the 6.75, puts us at it's less advantageous under this current model.
And these are very good questions because what we did is take two extremes, and for others, Winnebago, others will say that where I said it's 4,000, you know, the buffer, you could say it could be 100,000, 150, 200, where you would have more saving buffer, and then it would flatten. It'd be less savings on the tail end, but rating agencies tend to view that as neutral too, because exactly how you presented it. Is we don't want to be, we're going razor thin, right. And then, but we're generating 50,000, 7,500, and that gives us a little bit of a prudent buffer. So, yep.
Thank you.
Council members, do we have anyone else who would like to ask a question at this time?
Madam Chair.
Alderman Keister?
It's more of a statement than a comment. I want to thank Alderman McClanathan for bringing up about the consolidation of the pensions and stuff. But I will say that has been something that's been hanging around for at least 10, 15 years. They've been working on it that I can remember. We keep hearing about it, and from what I've heard in the past about it, I'm not too concerned about that consolidation right now because there's a lot of people that are fighting it. What I do think, though, is that this is something that we definitely have to continue discussion on and look at if it's going to save us that kind of money. But we do have to make sure that we continue to have funding sources to be able to pay for any unexpected increase in this. But I think we need to have further look and further dialogue on this.
Council, I would like to ask Manager Crow and Director Bucas if they would like to give us some of their viewpoints regarding what we were just told tonight.
Andy, do you want to start or do you want me to start? Because we've had a lot of discussions with both Baird, with Stefan from Baird, Kevin McKenna on this, and we've had internal discussions, and I've also reached out to several city managers that are looking at this. So, and I know Randy has as well. So,
yes, my concern is is in the future, and having a city council that is still buying into this program. Because once we move forward with this, if we do, future councilors are going to have to make sure that they do levy that money to pay the bonds back. We won't have a choice. We can't, as was stated, take a pension holiday or whatever. Those are solid, hard obligations now. So overall, I think it's a good idea. Our returns have not been that great, about 6.2, and right now we're paying interest at 6.75. That was just lowered this year. It was at 7. So if interest rates go up, that could be a problem for us as well.
I would like to ask you, Director Bucas, I understand your concerns regarding this, but if you were in the position of the council members, is this something that you would highly favor, or is this something that you would take a walk on?
I'm not sure I would take a walk on it at this point. I find it interesting. I find it intriguing. I also hate being in debt. I do not, whether it be for the city or personally, I do not like being in debt. I try to avoid borrowing as much as possible and pay cash as we go. But unfortunately, in this situation with our pension funds, we're in a situation where we can't pay cash. We're going to have to do something. This is a good alternative to bring our liability down. And we will have to, as stated, continue with our normal costs, and that may go up, may go down, depending on how the returns are. But I would hope that we can make at least a 5% return each year.
And one more thing, Director Bucas, if the consolidation efforts that Mr. McClanathan brought up did happen in the state of Illinois, how do you think that would affect this if we did go out for this bond issue?
Well, when that question was asked, I was pondering that before then. There are 4 different pension plans being discussed right now. All 4 of them are being pushed or at least being led by the Illinois Municipal League. They all take the police and fire downstate pensions in different directions. It all depends. Personally, I shouldn't say that because we're on live, but I don't trust the state. You look at their pension situation, they're $133 billion in the hole right now. I'm sure that if I can't say I'm sure because I don't know, if one of the pension reform bills went through, I would think that it would be a separate pension board than what's controlling the state pensions right now. I would hope it would be, but we don't know. I mean, that's one of the alternatives is they're talking about is having the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund handle the pension investments. And right now, the IMRF is doing really well. They're like 99% funded. So.
Thank you. And Council, just so you understand, the reason I ask these questions of Director Bucas is he is a very astute man when it comes to financial management, just as Alderman McClanathan is. And we do appreciate your time, Stefan.
Out here a little bit. At our current assessment rate with taxes and stuff, and I realize we don't have the exact figures as to the cost, but as it's projected here in the presentation and stuff, will our assessment meet the obligation with the bond?
Well, currently, we're looking at a pension payment of $2.8 million, it looks like. And we're currently levying for police and fire pensions about $2.6 million. So we're about $200,000 more to start this program.
Okay, follow up.
Yes, Alderman Keister.
And with your financial expertise and stuff, how much above the minimum payments that we have to make do you feel we should have or assess to be able to cover any potential increase in our obligation.
You're talking like a stabilization fund that Stefan talked about, or?
Yeah, something along that lines, yeah.
Well, if I'm looking at their, at the scenario, it looks like the increase each year would be about $100,000 until we hit the stabilization of about 3.7 million, or $3.7 million. So somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million would be nice to have in the bank.
Okay, thank you.
Chair? Or go ahead.
If you don't mind, I would like to give leave to hear from Alderman Busker first, and then.
Yes, with going through with this, once we close on the bonds, would that show us as fully funded towards the pensions as far as like Gadsby, if they were to come back and try to start fining people for being unfunded, or how would that work with this?
I think that's a question for our actuary.
Yeah, if you were to fully fund the plan up to 100%, then your GASB liability you wouldn't have those situations where your discount rate's using a blended rate and projecting insolvency. So getting up to 100% and making the timely contributions of the normal cost, and then also staying in line with the contributions of any additional unfunded liability that would be created would keep you in a solvent position, and you wouldn't have any extreme GASB differences or charges, as you mentioned.
Thank you, sir. And then we'll go to Alderman Berberet.
Thank you. Not quite sure who to direct this to, but what would be the underwriting fees, legal fees, attorney's fees, first year, subsequent years? This isn't free, I'm sure.
Well, you mean with the bond issue?
With the bond issue, yes.
It would be like any bond issue where the last one you did is pretty standard. You'd have bond counsel fees, would be a quote, and with negotiation with the city.
Okay.
You guys are in a driver's seat, you're the boss. There would be an underwriting that would pay us, and it would be consistent with what our last bond issue was for you. There would be the actuary, there'd be bank fees, paying agent, those are relatively minor, and rating agency fees, which are per just a sheet of pay. It would be under $20,000, so it wouldn't be big when you look at the size of the bond issue. Missing anything? Okay.
I didn't hear.
Your FA said 1.1%.
Thank you.
And if I could follow up on that, these fees, are they enveloped in or rolled over into the cost of what we would be paying?
The savings I showed you are net of all expenses, so there would be no additional. The fees are banked into the savings.
They're banked in there. Thank you, sir.
So there wouldn't be here, say $5, give us $4 for fees. No, it would be $5 to the city. Or in this case, all the savings I presented would go to you.
Thank you, sir. And then, again, Alderman McClanathan.
Thank you. Just a couple questions. With the municipalities that you've been working with, as you indicated, that there's the 90% state statute, and there's currently the 100% GASB requirement. Have any of the municipalities explored doing a 90% on it, or have they all looked at 100% or nothing?
It's funny. Yes, one or two that I'm currently running have asked to see the 90% funding scenario. They haven't decided to go forward on this concept, but they want to see the numbers.
I know both. Rochelle has taken the brief. I believe Dixon's, I don't know if you've briefed Dixon yet.
Nope.
But Rochelle, and they're playing around with many different scenarios, but he was asking for both the 100% and the 90% when I talked to Jeff about that. I don't know if they haven't made a decision whether to go forward or not.
No, and they haven't, but it's been tabled. So, yeah, it's.
Sure.
Alderman McClanathan.
Thank you. Manager Crow, Director Bucas, anyone in regards to this. Let's say we enter into it in the near future here, and right now, as home rule, we've got options in regards to how we fund it. I mean, unless you tell me if we go to the bond, that we're going to handle it all out of, you know, a levy. But I mean, right now, we've got options where we're gonna put X amount of dollars from property taxes, and then we're also looking at maybe other options. How would a loss of home rule impact our options for funding this? I think, if I recall, you said something to the effect of even non-home rule can exceed the levy amounts or the general limits for pensions, but how does loss of home rule impact this?
So once we have the bond for laws of home rule, we can fully tax for whatever the bond rate is, and that's one of the advantages. If we lose home rule, we can also levy for the full pension amount there, so we can levy for both the bond and also the pensions that we are owing. Those are two things that are specifically called out in state statute as we go forward.
Do we have the flexibility, though, that we have right now as to doing it through other rates, or are we going to have to do it under referendum and saying, would you like X?
Some of the things that we're looking at, which we're going to talk about later on this evening, we would have to go back to referendum for.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Anyone else wish to be heard at this time?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Alderman Keister.
Just one final question, kind of piggybacking on what Alderman McClanathan said. If we go the 90%, or we get a bid on that, we decide to go to 90% versus the 100%. I don't know who can maybe answer this. What is our risk for increased costs with additional levies on or not levies, but if the amount that we have to pay for the pension goes up or the interest rate goes down? I mean, how much additional risk are we taking of having to come up with some decent sized money suddenly because the pension went up if we don't fully fund it?
I'm not sure I understand.
If I understand it, maybe if you're not funding 100%, you're funding down to 90.
Yes.
Then you have increased problem, because if you don't hit that 90 by 2040, you've only done it up.
Mm-hmm. Really, this from my viewpoint, Director Bucas may say, the only way that this works, and the only way is if we fully fund all of our liability, because we run into some dangers as we go forward if we only look at 90%, because the Gadsby rules are 100% and the rating agencies are 100% when they look at that, when we make our rating calls. And that's why the actuaries, and then we have additional liability coming under the next set of Gadsby's. So really, to remove, if we want to remove all of our liability, we really need to, we don't, and I think that's why communities are only looking at the 100% here. When they've looked at the 90% and run the numbers, they realize that they really can't, they're not meeting, eliminating that liability. And I think the actuary will echo that.
Yeah, so if you're funding to 90% and you just want to stay at 90%, you still have to contribute more than just the normal cost going forward. There still is a payment to unfunded you'll still have to put into the plan to stay at 90%. And then going forward, once you hit 2040 and you've hit the statute required 90% at 2040, the way that you're looking at your Gadsby projections, are you going forward, are you going to still continue making those same payments even beyond 2040? And if not, the plan will gradually become insolvent by only being funded at 90% if you don't stay on top of all the payments that are coming in the long term. Up to 80 years is what the insolvency test looks at. It's an 80-year projection, so you have to stay current with that funding stream for that full 80 years.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Yes.
And I probably didn't word the question as well as I could have. I mean, in my mind, I know what I'm looking for. I just didn't know how to vocalize it. But you did answer my question. That it increases our potential of a significant increase in our payment per year if we don't go 100% versus 90%.
Yeah, it's not fully eliminating the payment to the plans of the unfunded liability. So you're still going to have a normal cost. You're still going to have a payment of your unfunded liability. It's a lot smaller than the $44 million, but you still have a piece out there, let's call it 4 million, if you're only, if you're taking 90% of that 4.4 million, there's still $4 million of unfunded remaining that you're still gonna have to pay down in the future. And if you only continue to contribute the normal cost as you would if you were funded 100%, that 4 million will grow with that interest, and it's gonna compound itself and snowball into another situation like you're in today.
Okay, thank you very much.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
if I may, I want to correct something that I said earlier. When I mentioned that the $2.6 million is what we're currently paying. That's at the 90%. If we were paying 100%, we'd be at almost $3.7 million. So by doing the bond, we're lowering our payment, our 100% funding payment from 3.7 to like to 2.8. So it'll be a savings there, but it'd be more than what we're paying today, but it'd be a savings if we were paying 100%.
Thank you very much, Director Bucas. I appreciate that effort. Gentlemen, the actuaries, Stefan Roberts and Robert Reitz, we appreciate all your information. I do notice that there's a few other people that are possibly with you. Did they have anything to add tonight? That's a no. Thank you, sir. Any other questions from council or Manager Crow at this time?
Kevin McKenna's actually, he's our financial advisor. He's the one that gives us advice as we go forward in buying the bonds. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McKenna, for being interviewing audience and offering support for the other gentleman. If we don't have any here from the mayor, okay, or anyone else at this time, I thank you, gentlemen, for your time tonight and for explaining this information to us. It is a difficult subject to digest when we look at the amount of debt that's involved here, and we realize that any decisions we make regarding this are going to affect future generations. So it's a pretty big decision making on our side too. So thank you very much.
Thank
you. Sorry for that big sigh, gentlemen and ladies. Moving on, for number 8, we have the presentation on the RFQ Comprehensive Plan. This will be presented by Ratio Leslie Roth, Associate Principal, Director of Urban Planning. And if you wouldn't mind stepping up to the podium and clearly state your name for the listening audience. Thank you.
And Leslie, I believe you're, okay, you got it up.
So my name is Leslie Roth. I'm an Associate Principal and Director of Urban Planning with Ratio. We're a multidisciplinary architecture and planning firm with 4 offices, and I sit in Chicago. I also have with me my colleague, Eli Lecter, who is our lead landscape architect in the Chicago office. Thank you so much for having us here today. I'm going to take you through a brief presentation to discuss the City of Freeport Comprehensive Plan. The slide that you're seeing now is our team composition. This team was selected intentionally because of our focus on the multidisciplinary nature of our practice. With Ratio, we have a mixture of development specialists, urban planners, landscape architects, a historic preservationist. I will be the project manager leading this team. Gewalt Hamilton will be our infrastructure and transportation engineers and planners. We have worked with both Gewalt Hamilton and BDI on several efforts, particularly comprehensive planning efforts, and really believe that this team can deliver a quality product. Business Districts, Inc. is our market analyst and economic development specialist. Bridget is actually from the area, from Central Illinois, and has done quite a bit of work in the area of Rockford and Freeport. When we begin comprehensive plans, we really like to think about it actually from the end. What's going to happen when we deliver you a thick document and it's time for you to get to the work of implementation? So we like to show this slide to help you understand that our focus is really on implementation. and that we want to make sure that you find value in this 18-month planning process. This slide demonstrates our proficiency at comprehensive plans, corridor and streetscape plans, as well as our understanding of the dollars it takes to actually implement this effort. It's a very ambitious effort that the city is embarking on, replacing the 2010 plan, and we want to make sure that as we go through this process with you, that you're prepared for implementation at the end of the process. So why us? Our ability to connect to community is really extremely important in the beginning of any planning process, but particularly with comprehensive plans. As I mentioned previously, we selected this team with BDI and Gewalt Hamilton as our support. It was intentional, and it's because of our capacity and depth of experience. We're bringing to you national best practices, a real understanding of this particular part of Illinois, and also some specialists that can help us understand the city of Freeport's challenges and opportunities as we create a framework for the future that will guide decision-making for the next 10 to 20 years. We really believe in this idea of concept to construction. This goes back to my previous statement about the importance of implementation. We all feel like it's a colossal waste of time to go through this process with you, involve all the residents, the council, the advisory committee that will be set up and structured through this process, and frankly, stakeholders and residents' time if we get to the end and don't have a plan for implementation. So this is a shared vision and shared mission, a shared necessity of all of our team members, and the way that we approach comprehensive planning. When we go after pursuits, we really look at what type of city, what type of municipality we're going to be working with. We don't chase every single project that we see, and we're really excited about the city of Freeport. We understand the authenticity. We understand that you've gone through a branding process and that you have a very good idea of who you are. We want to show you where you can go. So how do we do it? We've planned for an 18-month time frame, each one of, and we also have planned for project milestones. This is in our quals that we submitted to the city. We like to plan in adequate periods for review of each deliverable to make sure that we're not only meeting your expectations, residents' expectations, and stakeholders' expectations, but that there's a clear understanding of the path forward after each milestone. It starts with creating a comprehensive plan vision. This is something that we all do together, that we gain consensus on, and that guides us through the 18-month-long process. One thing that comprehensive plans do, most of the people in this room probably already understand that it is a policy document, that it is adopted by City Council, and that the Plan Commission is empowered to create this document. However, the contents of this document are variable, and they can be tailored to your particular community. In looking at the RFP, we really thought that emphasizing placemaking strategies was going to be important. We know that you've done some work looking at streetscapes. We know that there are some infrastructure challenges that we're going to be working with. We know that there's some improvements to the public realm, as well as a branding strategy that has resulted in the coming together of 4 economic development and tourism bodies into one body. So we want to make sure that those placemaking strategies are a priority of this. And also understanding what are the regulatory relationships and what are the funding sources. So again, when we work through this process, while it is a focus on land use planning and policy, that there are relationships that are cultivated and sustained throughout the process. We start with engaging the public. I mentioned creating this community vision, but more important to that is appropriate and effective communication. From day one, we start looking at who do we want to be involved, and we really have found success in tapping into the social networks of the community to understand what the needs are, to create an inclusive process, to make sure that the process is transparent and also that it's meaningful. We know that the city cannot implement a comprehensive plan on its own, and so building organizational capacity through stakeholder involvement can help with that implementation success. creating an inclusive process is very important. We realize that the demographics of the city of Freeport have been changing. We want to make sure that this process is meaningful for everyone, that there is an opportunity to engage, and that they find a personal connection to the process. We've created 4 priorities for the comprehensive planning process. The first one is looking at the plan's best practices and previous reports that the city has accomplished in mitigating stormwater and flooding issues. We know that this is a chronic issue, that it's ongoing and probably a sore spot for a number of people. But we want to make sure that the time wasn't wasted in developing those plans. We don't want you to have to repeat yourself. And we want to make sure that as we go through reviewing of those plans, that we take the relevant parts, the parts that need to be moved forward, and those live in the comprehensive plan. The second priority is that integration process. It's a focus on strengthening community. It's a focus on the implementation of the process. We think this is, while it is priority number 2, we think this probably should be priority number 1. You've spent a lot of time on plans, and I want to applaud your efforts on creating strategic plans and getting to this point where you've decided to evaluate the path forward. The third priority is looking at responsive and diverse housing solutions. Particularly in the third ward, we know that there's some issues there related to flooding. We also know that as the demographics change in the city, you want to be prepared for the new residents that could be moving to the community or those changing of lifestyle. For example, aging in place. So the third priority is really looking at what are those housing solutions that will create, that will allow you to be responsive to future housing need. And the fourth priority is really this organizational capacity. The economic development strategy, as I'll get into in a little bit, really, we really want to work with the city on helping understand how to build capacity for this plan to make sure that, again, you are prepared for the future. I'm going to talk a little bit about development opportunities, economic development, infrastructure, and transportation. However, my expertise as a project manager and urban planner is coordinating the team. So if there are questions about those specific disciplines, I'll do the best that I can. One thing that's really important to note from the slide is where people are moving. The diagram on the left talks about how many young people today are actually choosing smaller towns and suburbs. You hear a lot about this in the news. What are the millennials up to? What are they buying? What are they going to do once they find jobs? And really, the city of Freeport is an ideal place for millennials to settle. The cost of living is not as high as some cities, and particularly with the job options that younger folks today have the opportunity to discover or to create, this is really important. The bullets on the side are really to talk about how we're going to look at other development opportunities. We will look at market analysis trends. We'll look at what's happening in the region. We'll look at how small cities can actually grow. And this is measured incremental growth that is acceptable to the pace of life and the quality of Freeport. We'll also look at Freeport's position in the region. We know that you've recently completed a branding strategy, and being able to apply that to the comprehensive planning process and actually extend what that is will be an important part of this process. The prioritization framework really talks about what's first and what's going to be impactful as we move through the comprehensive planning process. We want to look at business diversity. We want to look at expansion of existing initiatives. You've done a really great job in developing some of those that we know small business, particularly makers and craft businesses, have been taking advantage of. And then leveraging the existing successes. With mobility, our approach to mobility and transportation planning is multimodal. So we're not only looking at where the cars go, but we're looking at how to leverage those connections with pedestrian and bikes also. There's some really wonderful trail systems in the area that have been looked at in the past. The comprehensive plan will also provide guidance into connections to those existing trail systems. The other thing that it will do is look at where people are moving in the city from neighborhoods to destinations downtown, open space, trail connections, and then we'll also take a look at freight and truck traffic as well. For the infrastructure, we know that there's a very strong public works department in the city of Freeport, that a strategic plan has recently been completed, and that there's been a lot of thinking and working around the capacity of that system, as well as how to mitigate and alleviate the flooding in the community. So we don't want to repeat the work that you've done or the staff that you already have working on these issues. Our infrastructure folks will, however, supplement that work and take a forward-thinking approach to make sure that any policies or strategies that are created are coordinated with existing programs and initiatives. Mark Stoner is our historic preservation specialist in our Chicago office. And in talking about this project, he got really excited about it, did the due diligence and understanding, where the existing historic assets were. And what part of his excitement was really about looking at particular districts within the city with a historical perspective. Diane Williams from BDI is also a historic preservation specialist. So we'll use the documents that you've already created so you don't have to repeat yourselves and look at how to find additional value in the built environment, how to preserve some of the historic assets that you have that are able to be sustained, and then finding value in what those historical assets could potentially be. By integrating each one of these disciplines, which will eventually turn into chapters of the comprehensive plan, we want to find a way to come to this idea of creating an effective environment. It means a lot of things. It's a relatively complex topic, but what it does is, one, it utilizes the outcomes of the previous studies. We don't want you to feel like, or the community to feel like, the time that you've spent developing these plans, the money that you've spent on consultant fees has gone to waste. So we definitely plan on creating an effective and economical process that uses the work that you've already done. However, throughout the years, there potentially could have had conflict between some of those reports. We want to take a really sharp eye in understanding if there are any conflicts and resolving those so that we can make sure the comprehensive plan is one that can move you into the future. And lastly, understanding development impact. So we'll not only be looking at the land use framework, the economic development context, the transportation systems, and the infrastructure capacity, but we'll also be looking at what is the first project you're actually going to get done. That involves at times early developer engagement, it looks at site analysis, and also it identifies project partners. We feel that by the end of a comprehensive planning process, project partners should be identified to hold those accountable, to help you with the heavy lift, as well as continue the momentum of the process over the last 18 months. So I'm going to have Eli come up and talk to us about open space and the park framework.
So one option that we included in this comprehensive plan was to look at the park district and create a master plan for the park district. We take a holistic approach when we look at open space planning, so we're not just looking at the park system, but all the surrounding connections as well. So we would take that process, look at the assessment, and then have a boots on the ground approach where we would tailor it with the comprehensive plan to engage the community, engage stakeholders, to look at what we want out there before then diving into the actual planning process for those parks.
Thank you. So ultimately, we're creating a framework for the future of Freeport. We're very excited about this. It's a 10 to 20-year policy document. It's a planning framework. It will help you make decisions. It's a guide for the future, and it's really created to move the goals of the city forward. There's a lot of opportunity in the city that we're really excited about, and so we'd like to get started with you. Thank you.
Manager Crow.
So a couple things to update, and I know we've got this later on the agenda to talk more in detail about it. The Park District is moving forward. They have selected Ratio as their agent going forward. They do have to do some negotiations with them their price, but they like so when we went forward, we made a proposal to both the Park District and the Housing Authority that we do an integrated plan. And that's one of the things that why Ratio jumped to the front, because they were they proposed to us the ability to look at it as an integrated plan. Additionally, the Greater Freeport Partnership has approached me about foregoing some of their fees to help pay for this plan as we go forward. I've also got legal opinions on how we can pay for this through both TIF and hotel motel tax for a portion of this, the TIF and hotel motel tax from Aaron Zito, Attorney Zito. So, so those are some of the things. We believe that in developing this, doing a coordinated plan between us, the Park District, and the Housing Authority, looking at where we're going, that will develop a real strategy and bring the Greater Freeport Partnership a whole strategy as we go forward to the city. And Ratio was really the only firm that we talked to that took this forward into that idea, into that concept. So that's why Ratio was our recommendation as we go forward.
Manager Crowe. I understand, the city does need an updated comprehensive plan specifically to apply for grant funding through the state or federal grants. I also understand that the Park District is highly in favor of this specific company known as Ratio, and they were highly impressed with the presenter. I'm sorry, I just lost your name.
Leslie.
Leslie, please forgive me. She is very impressive. My question for you is this. Housing Authority, I understand the Park District would possibly pay their share of approximately $45,000 unless they can negotiate that. Oh, I see they already negotiated it. No, they did not.
They're
They
negotiating with them
us.
right now.
Okay.
Much as when Ratio did, we negotiated down
Yes, I see that.
$16,000 out of the cost.
Yeah, down to $108,490, correct?
That's correct.
My question is this, Housing Authority, would they pay a partial cost of that $108,490, or is there?
We're still in negotiations with the Housing Authority over that. And I'm actually meeting with the Housing Authority Board, but we want to involve them in looking at where, as we move, particularly that housing that is east of the Pecatonica, and I'm giving a presentation to the Housing Authority on Friday about how we go forward with the planning with that as we go forward to the pre-disaster mitigation grant in working with the Housing Authority as that portion.
And I will ask the council for their input in just one moment. If you can tolerate me just one more minute. I understand that the Planning Commission had these proposals before them from the 3 different companies, Ratio, MSA, and Housel Levine. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly.
Housel Levine, yeah.
Now, were they presented with a live dialogue like this, or were they presented only with paper copy?
No, this is a full live dialogue with all 3. In fact, that particular Planning Commission, we didn't finish until almost 10 o'clock at night.
And sir, was there a public hearing or anything that we need to do?
Not for this. So since this is I got a ruling from Attorney Cox that because this is for professional services, the council does not necessarily have to go with the low bidder here, but rather go the one that meets the requirements of what we are looking for.
That was my last thing I wanted to touch base on. I don't mean to be the bad person here, but I do have to bring up the fee structure. Ratio was in second place as far as the cost analysis goes, and they were somewhat higher than the MSA. Can you give us selling points on Ratio over the MSA?
So MSA was very much more of took an engineering approach, did not look at the economic approach. And in fact, when we asked them about the Park District, they had problems. They had to go out and did not give a good presentation to the Park District, that one that they were comfortable with. Ratio was more talking about more citizen engagement, more involvement with that. MSA evaluation we did not feel that it met the requirements of what we were looking for. I know Alderman Rivera was there as part of the Planning Commission. He may give some other feelings on, as well as Director Bucus and Director Zubkoff are both present at that as well.
Well, if the council's leave, then I would like to hear from Director Zubkoff and hear a little bit of his enlightenment of what happened when he listened to all three firms. Thank you.
Yeah, at that planning commission that Manager Crowe is referring to on November 8th, we did hear presentations from all three firms, Ratio, MSA, and Housel Levine. Housel Levine in discussing, they were the most expensive, and from my recollection in the minutes of the meeting, their presentation really didn't have a whole lot to do with Freeport. It was kind of just a generic presentation that it looked like they maybe brought everywhere. Wasn't very centric to us. So the two that did actually talk about Freeport were MSA and were Ratio, of course, and MSA was good, and their price was the lowest, but when we compared the MSA presentation to Ratio, and in recalling the minutes when, as importantly or more importantly, the Planning Commission compared the two, there was a polish and a professionalism and an expertise that Ratio had that we just didn't see with MSA. MSA is a smaller firm. They're a good firm, but we just didn't feel that they were as good of a fit or offered the scope of services that was, a match for Freeport like Ratio's was. Between MSA and Ratio, there's probably not a wrong answer, but we thought Ratio was the righter of the two answers.
Thank you, Director Zubkoff. Now, Council. Yes, Alderman Berbere, please.
Thank you. I would agree with what was said, but I would also add that one of the things about Ratio that impressed me, and this is a subjective decision we're making, Ratio talked about engagement of the community. Critical. You need input from all parts of the community to make a plan come together, and that's what people accept it. At the end, they talked about implementation, and the others didn't. They will be here, from what I understand, to help us get that first project and the second project, and get those projects going and the funding that go with them. The others didn't discuss that, and we need that. If this isn't, you don't want another Moby Dick sitting on a bookshelf someplace that nobody looks at. Mm-hmm. You want to be able to use this as a plan for, I'm not sure I agree with 20 years, but 7 to 10 years to develop this community where it's going to go.
Thank you. Other aldermen?
Alderman Batchelor.
Alderman Ross.
In regards to the last comprehensive plan, how close did we come to that one?
Follow up? Yes.
Being new to a lot of stuff, I was given a copy of the last comprehensive plan, and I read it. I didn't know what town I was in.
I was going to say, that's a Moby Dick on the shelf.
Yeah, and it just doesn't look like Freeport.
So in other words, we didn't come close at all, but with this new plan, not to be objective, but I just want to say I'm looking forward to it, the new plan. I just was trying to add the two together.
I think Ratio also talked about having milestones, and that will be there for management team to review. Okay, where are we after the first year, the second year? Are these things being accomplished? That's critical, so it doesn't sit on the shelf.
Yes, Alderman Busker.
Yes, I was, looking over this. What kind of track record do you have when you do present a plan to a community? The success rate of that plan, is it 80% fulfilled, 90% at the end of the projections of what things you say are in there get done? Where are you at with that?
Thanks for your question. It totally depends on the community. What we like to do is build that organizational capacity so there is a very good chance of doing implementation. The other thing is I want to go back to the slide that talks about what the actual impact is from projects that we're tracking. And this is just a handful of projects, but these are some of the examples of the kind of public and private dollars that we've been able to secure for our clients after completion of either a downtown plan, a comprehensive plan, or a corridor. So part of what this process does is it builds organizational capacity, which will work with you to identify those funding sources, as well as connect you to developers, real estate brokers, funding agencies, both at local, state, and federal levels. And Matt Roof is actually the development redevelopment specialist who is responsible for most of this work. So during the process, when we work through each one of the topic areas, land use, housing, natural resources, we're always looking for opportunities to implement those strategies. And we'll work with you on identifying which ones are going to take precedent and priority. It's because the comprehensive planning processes are very long and the implementation generally takes many years because you can't raise, the hundreds of millions of dollars that the comprehensive plan projects may have. We want to work with you to create realistic goals for that implementation. So it's really how fast can we move together on getting this implemented.
So Ms. Roth, if I understand correctly, all three companies that presented to the Planning Commission were basically selling like a product, and you are selling that product with a maintenance and management packet included, where you will do the follow-through. I shouldn't say management, but additional help with other projects. Will there be additional costs to that with the follow-up as the years go by?
So the scope of work that we created is specifically for the comprehensive planning process. At the end of that process, yes, implementation matrix with partners identified, projects identified, funding sources, and the cost of those projects will be included. Support for implementation of those projects after the initial contract period will be a separate contract.
Thank you for that information. Council? Alderman Clem, you look like you want to say something.
I want to say something that probably won't be 100% positive, but I'll give you a little history, okay? Then I'll let you guys talk about this. I went through the last comprehensive plan. Sally, you were on the board for much of it. A lot of it we got there. We got a book, beautiful book, when we got all done. And did we implement any of that? The answer to that's probably no. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do this, but I'm going to tell you what I think, okay? I see an awful lot of money going out. When I say going out, we've got all in. We got Greater Freeport Partnership. We got ratio. We've got whatever. Where's all this coming from? I think this is a great idea, and you have to do one, tell me if I'm wrong, every X number of years, right?
Every 7 to 10 years, it's required to update your comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, the comprehensive plan that was put together was a nice document, and I wanted to pick and Haas-Levine did the last document. And it was, and I was specifically looking for a firm that could give us a product that was useful. I will tell you that the business community and the members of the Greater Freeport Partnership, as I said, are they want to go forward, and that this is so important with them that they are willing to forego some of the fees that we are paying for them over the next 2 years to do this.
I appreciate hearing that, because when we put Greater Freeport Partnership together, they were going to do everything in the world for us, and through different stuff. And I just, I want to go back. No, I'm not going to go there. I mean, I just have some reservations. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm not saying we should. But please understand where you're going with this. This is the first cost in the situation. The other company held all the same meetings, had brought people in and talked to them, and there were meetings at the library and all that kind of stuff. So are we just recycling something, or do we know this is where we want to go? And it sounds like that Manager Crow and the people sound like they want to go here. So that's all I'm saying. Okay.
Thank you for your viewpoint on that, Alderman Clem. I would like to say, too, that we do need to update the city comprehensive plan. At this time, we have the bids before us with the input of our department heads and our city manager. And so I guess I need to ask this of Manager Crow. When are we looking forward to possibly bringing this to the council floor, and what is it you're looking for a time frame?
So I would like to bring this forward to get this moving. We actually had it on the agenda for last council meeting, but after discussion with several of you, I realized that I needed to bring Ratio in to give you a brief and give you some opportunity to discuss it. The Planning Commission is chomping at the bit to start this process, and the business community is looking for us to move forward. The Park District has already made the decision that they are moving forward with this. Their plan is 20 years old, and theirs is way out of date. So I'll get more feeling from the Housing Authority when I talk with them on Friday.
Okay, and Director Bucas, are you confident that we will have funding for this through our TIF expenditure fund and our, let's see, hotel motel tax we were talking about? And do we have any other magic money that you can think of to help cover the costs for this?
Yes, I believe the magic money will cover any shortfalls. But yes, we do. Depending on how we budget, the fact that Greater Freeport Partnership's willing to take a reduction in their fees, we should have enough money to cover this over a 2-year period.
Well, that is actually a very positive note. Council, any other thoughts?
Chair.
Alderman McClenathan.
Thank you. Alderman Clem kind of raised a few of the objections that you hear. I think there's some others that will be questions that'll be asked. I think we need to at least put out there on this because I'm sure those who were there 10 years ago had every intention of implementing, and like you say, that we dropped on, or there was a lot of balls dropped at some level on that. One thing that I imagine will be asked is, that you already addressed, was obviously we have to do a comprehensive plan. We have to update it, and but the next part is, you mentioned GFP. You mentioned obviously the staff that we have here. You've got the Planning Commission. I think the question would be asked. Where are the deficiencies in those entities to be able to produce a comprehensive plan? So I know you have an answer for that. If you could just address that, because I know that'll be raised at some level somewhere.
Okay, we do not have a staff planner on here, and the comprehensive plan requires more than just the staff planners. We do not have the expertise in looking at housing, looking at ways to where housing should go, the housing need study. Those are all things that communities normally go out and get hire people to do. Greater Freeport Partnership, while they're in the process of getting ready to interview for their planner, the planner in the partnership is set up to take the comprehensive plan, look at it going forward, integrating the streetscaping and looking at taking this plan or whatever comprehensive plan and taking it forward to meet the city's goals as we go forward. A single urban planner cannot put a comprehensive plan together. A planning commission, I've been involved with 2 comprehensive plans. A planning commission, you're talking about meeting every week for 3 or 4 hours a week to put a comprehensive plan. The one I was involved with, a full, completely rewrite, was for York County, Virginia. We met every week for 3 to 4 hours, plus did engagements on top of that, and it still took us 2.5 years. And that's with a consulting firm also involved with us.
Chair.
Yes.
So bottom line, if you're taking pretty much all those 3 entities that we refer to combined, you still probably wouldn't have the expertise to be able to efficiently and thoroughly produce the type of product that we're hoping to produce. Is that accurate?
That's correct. All right, that's correct. We're trying to develop a program, a plan that the partnership can take and go forward and execute, that we can actually establish where we want to go within the city. Take what this council has laid out in the strategic plan and develop over the next 7 to 10 years. I will tell you right now, we do not have identified shovel-ready sites within the city where businesses can move into, which, and will in turn drive our capital improvement plan. We know we don't, one of the questions that came up in the strategic planning for the Greater Freeport Partnership is where should the corridors be? The entrances into the city. Should it still remain Galena? Should it be Adams Street? Should it be off 26? All of that's looked at the comprehensive plan. Additionally, it looks at where, if we want to go forward, looking at where we should be annexing in and where we should be going with that. And that's, and where our growth is actually going to occur. Understanding that, you know, that we need to go forward. It's a plan in which we can use throughout the city, in which the council endorses.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Alderman Clem.
Three things, I guess. First thing is, if you've got the bodies that you mentioned, being Greater Freeport Partnership, yourself, all the business leaders, so on and so forth, and all that, the obvious thing to do would be to move forward. If you've got all those people that are going to say, hey, we believe in this and we're going to do this. Okay, that's number one. Number two, remember one of the things that we talked about last year that didn't get done and is going to be the first thing on your list to come around this time was a $1 million plan to redo Chicago Street. Remember that, right after the Art Center, so on and so forth? So that's laying out there. And the third thing I just want to mention, that this could be the opportune time, would be, has anybody talked to the county? I mean, as far as if they want to participate and do anything, because, you know, I've been around a few years and they seem to be one of the little holdups in this thing, you know. So just a couple things. But if you've got everybody behind you that you say you got behind you, then you should move forward with it.
And I would just like to say to the council, looking at these bids with MSA raising their price by $3,000 to $85,000 and Ratio decreasing their amounts to the city to $108,490 from the $124,744. The difference between the two at this time is $23,490 between the lowest and the mid proposal. So we're looking at a slight increase of the $23,490 difference for a plan that should last 7 to 9 years that we need right away. Hopefully to look at some of those new TIF districts that are going in along the Galena corridor, to look at the zoning issues that we have, to hopefully have shovel-ready properties, and hopefully have a project manager known as Ms. Leslie Roth to work with our city entities to hopefully bring some of those new businesses to town. So that's what we have before us. That I'm hoping to move forward to the next council meeting. Do we have a general consensus for that, or do we already have that on the table?
Item number 11.
Yeah, that's down there.
That'll be there before us? Okay.
Alderman Bradshaw.
Yes, Alderman Ross?
Yes, is there a deadline for the plan, or when can it be put into effect?
As soon as it's completed. There is no state mandated or city mandated timeline on this.
It just have to be put in effect within the 10 years of the...
That's correct. We have to have it, what they like to do is have it redone within the 10-year mark. It's one of the things that's looked at when you submit your grants and your proposals as we go forward. When we submitted some of the grants we're working on right now, they're looking at our comprehensive plan, our capital improvement plan. The enterprise zone looks at it as we go forward, what's current within the enterprise zone, and also the capital improvement plan. So all of those factors come into it.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Alderman Keister.
Just out of curiosity, Director or Manager Crow, you mentioned about the entities that look at the comprehensive plan as far as grants and stuff are concerned. And this may sound like a silly question, but do they ever look at it after a period of time and make a determination because the plan was not followed, as has happened in the past?
It's really, no, they don't do that. They look at how up-to-date it is and whether it establishes a vision for the community.
Okay, and nothing follow-up is ever done to see if it's actually followed or anything
No.
like that? Okay, thank you.
And I guess my last statement regarding Project Manager Leslie Roth, would you like to tell us anything else you would look forward to if you are granted this comprehensive plan that you would do for our community, or how you would engage the residents, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
Absolutely, I'd love to. Public engagement is actually one of the things about this plan that gets me really excited. In the RFQ, there were actually quite a number of meetings, and I pride the community on creating an RFP that prioritizes stakeholder involvement. I think this is really important in creating a framework for success of the community by having as many residents as possible engage with the process, and creating a number of opportunities for them to gauge at both a level that they feel comfortable with and around issues, organized around issues that are of interest to them or that they are affected by. So in our RFP response, we actually talked about a number of different public engagement opportunities. Generally, the kickoff meeting is followed by the creation of a public engagement plan, which is supplemented by a communications plan. So we understand that not every resident or stakeholder in Freeport uses a computer, can maybe even read or speaks a different language. And so we always look for opportunities to reach out to people in the way that they feel most comfortable. If that's in a different language, if that's a flyer at the library, if that's electronically. We use both traditional and non-traditional virtual methods for outreach. In the RFP, we talk about several different opportunities for engagement that were formalized that we had to respond to, including 3 public information sessions that we'll work with the city to coordinate and facilitate, 4 public workshops, including public comment period, reporting out to council as well as commission, and then a number of presentations to the organizing bodies of the city to make sure that we are meeting those expectations. In addition to these formal meetings, we like to provide opportunities for people to engage in a less formal way. Sometimes, we understand that not everybody feels comfortable in City Hall. Maybe 6:00 p.m. on a Tuesday night is not the most ideal time, especially if you're, have kids or are working another shift or just can't make it for some reason. So we want to coordinate with the city's schedule on doing pop-up workshop events, to participate in events, festivals, programming, other initiatives that you have. The partnerships that were mentioned are excellent opportunities to co-brand, co-promote the comprehensive planning process and make sure that that outreach is really comprehensive and that also that it's meaningful. So we will build a project website for this that will host all of the meeting minutes, all of the documents, so anybody has access to this. We'll also discuss communication protocols with the selection of an advisory or steering committee. Many times we can do a portal for that information to live if there's documents that are more sensitive or not ready to be released to the public yet. Ideally, really what this comes to is that we're at your service. So we're not doing our job if at the end of this process, you are not structured for success. Reaching out to the public and making sure that there is awareness about the comprehensive planning process, that there's excitement around it, and also that you're prepared to move forward with even small projects. One of the things that we've done, for example, very cost-conscious project is doing a parklet. So in one community, we actually used one parking space and set up grass and benches to show that there can be very easy public realm improvements. And people actually used it. In another community, we did the same thing, and a healthcare facility came out and did free blood pressure screenings because it was just a way to embed this process with as much of community as we can, and to celebrate the hard work that you've already done in creating these collaborative partnerships with other agencies and organizations. So really this, from your point of view as the city and from our point of view as a consultant, this collaborative relationship really makes the process that much more meaningful and really sets you up for success. The fact that you already have organizations and agencies that are willing to partner for this effort already puts you heads and shoulders above many other communities that we've worked with who don't have that organizational capacity. So we're looking forward to leveraging that and moving Freeport into the future.
Thank you, Ms. Roth. Council, are we finished? Thank you very much, Ms. Roth.
Thank you so much. We look forward to working with you.
And also, Mr. Lecter, thank you for assisting. Moving on to item number 9, discussion regarding dividing $8 infrastructure increase into $4 for storm sewer, $2 for water, and $2 for streets. This is presented by Director Carr and City Manager Crowe. Manager Crowe.
So I'll start this off and then turn it over to Dennis. So we were tasked to look at ways. We have several infrastructure areas that we're of concern with. And so over the last 4 or 5 months, we've actually sat down with Fairgram and looked at our budget and also looked at what we were doing. And we've been gathering, looking at our storm issues, our street issues, and looking at how we can fund these. Currently, the funding for storm, we get $4 on the, we'll strictly do we'll strictly maintain the system we have. And then we asked Fairgram if we took this, the next infrastructure fee we have set up and only put $2 towards the water infrastructure that the council had approved and then divided it up. They said, and what would be the impact? And their feeling is we can still continue on to complete what is set up over the next 7 to 10 years with what we receive for water. So we were looking at other options here to go forward. And what Dennis is going to come up with is a integrated staff look at a proposal that we're going to give to council on what to do with the next $8 infrastructure fee that you had approved.
Director Carr?
Yeah, so when I was given this task, it's been kind of ongoing since I've gotten here, based off of the street assessment as well as the different stormwater problems that we've kind of come up with here around the city. So when we were given this task, I know Lowell said that we can currently maintain with the storm water that we get in our current rate plan. But however, if that were to have been the case, then we wouldn't be proposing another rate increase for the storm. So our current funding for the storm is not quite there for the system we have, as well as for the system that should be here for the water that we get. But for the $4 storm rate increase, as you can kind of see, the breakdown there would be a little over $500,000 per year. So when we were looking at some of these storm projects, I've got a map that'll come up on the next one. But so the 3 critical level storm projects, these are the projects that if they were to fail, it would be a disaster, as in half the city would not drain and would back up and flood. So that is what I was kind of considering at this critical level. The 7 mid-level projects, some of these are based off of some detention ponds, and if these were to fail, or as they have failed, they begin to affect a larger number of properties, not just a singular property or a me and my neighbor's yard kind of thing, but this is more of a kind of a grouping. So as you can kind of see the estimates, they begin to kind of really wrap themselves up here. But something that has also not been looked at in the past is what do we do with the future? I mean, when we start redoing some of these roads, do we put storm sewer in, or do we put them back the way they are? I mean, right now, a good portion of the city does not drain functionally. It just drains through yards. It drains surface flow across properties until it gets to somewhere where it can evaporate. I mean, that's what I've been seeing, and that's what the calls have been coming in. That's what's happening. And so this is kind of, it's very zoomed out, but as you can kind of see, you've got some red The red issues are kind of dead center in town. It's over here by Reed Park. There's an inlet that drains a good portion of this chunk of town. So if this that was not completed in a previous project were to fail, that little portion of town would not be able to drain. There's a little red dot right in here, over here at Benton and Jackson. This one and this one up here are both storm outlets underneath the railroad tracks. So these require a little bit more coordination between us and the railroad. But these are two locations that drain a good portion of downtown as well as this, where this one ties in, it swings through town and then out that outlet. So those are some of the more critical areas. And then as you kind of look around, you can kind of see the orange dots kind of poking up along Greenfield. We've got a series of detention basins over there, and we've got Navajo, Blackhawk School. These are areas that address multiple houses. And so the $4 rate increase would get us on our way to fixing some of these projects. So the $2 street increase, I was told to look into what would happen if we bonded out for this $2 increase. And so with Randy's help, he's kind of come up with this. We would roughly have about $2.75 million over that 15-year bond rate. And then in doing so, we currently have some water projects going on. And so I took this as a task we don't want to fix now what we'll have to tear up later. And so by doing that, we would have to look at where is the bad pavement, but also where is the good water and the good sewer, which begins to really narrow down the projects. So this is our street assessment, with the yellows needing upgrading, with the reds being a reconstruct. So then when we lay the water main on top of it, you start to see a whole bunch of flashy colors there. Pretty much if a color popped up on top of that road, the water main is bad. So that doesn't make you feel really good about the choices that we're going to have to make in the near future. So then I zoomed in, so that way we can kind of see the different quadrants in town in no specific order. But so as you can see here, you can see, this colorful water main kind of sitting under the heart of town, where the west side of town was kind of built with some newer stuff. But you can start to see some of these areas where we've got good water main, good sewer, bad roads. The northeast quadrant of town here, the water main was built. This is probably one of the older parts of the town. So, I mean, the water main was never, or I shouldn't say never, but it doesn't seem like it's really been updated as fast as it should be. So you start to see some minimal areas. Here's a couple areas here along Iroquois. That kind of sums up that area of where the poor pavement is with the decent water main. So here's the southwest part of town. Again, this area down here actually doesn't have water main. They're all on wells. So we don't have that pavement issue there. Here's a newer subdivision, so we've got the water main requires we need, the sewer, but the poor pavement. And then here's the southeast part of town. We sit with the older section of town as well. So then I had Kurt put me together a map. The highlighted areas are the roads that would fall under that category of poor pavement, good water main, and then sanitary sewer that we could at least line. And so this one here, we took out all the other colors. All you see is those roads. So those are the roads that I'm looking at with this funding. So that way we don't rebuild them and then the water main break and we come back and we Swiss cheese it, that kind of thing. I feel like that's been done in the past, and the objective would be to not spend that money again. So of those areas, if we start to kind of pan them out and then look at some of the lengths and areas, Woodside Drive is a candidate for this cold in place recycling. Not many roads in town do it. You can't have a lot of manholes or vault lids, stuff like that. Essentially, they would come in and mill up your whole pavement and your rock as well. They would throw down some oil, and then they would come back once it cures out, and they would put a surface on it. So that would be the option I would want to consider here. It's a long road. That's a lot of reconstruct. But if we can do the cold in place recycling, it's one big long paving train. It's like 3 trucks that come through. They'll come in, eat it all up, put it all down. Then you can either put your chip seal or your asphalt overlay on top. But it's one of those things where it's really good on country roads, and Woodside Drive just happens to feel like a country road. So then we'd look up, if we can get a group of projects, we can get better costing. So when we look up into the old Cherokee Hills, you've got 3 roads there that are really close together. They're all close to the same shape. They've all got a lot of alligator cracking. They're all kind of coming down. So this would come the same kind of full depth reconstruction as was done actually on the other side of Galena up there. And then Meadows Drive. This actually fell in a TIF district, and I believe my predecessor at one time was hoping to use the Meadows TIF for this, but then the funding is lacking in that area. But this is another one where there's multiple roads next to each other, which would make a larger project, which would then also bring the cost down per items. So this is another one that was kind of brought up. So then when you break down all these numbers, this is going with the chip seal on the Woodside Drive, then the reconstructs on the other ones. We come up with about 1.9 essentially million. This leaves a little bit left, but at the same time, we also have to realize that we do have all these water projects coming down in the next 10 years that were all part of that water rate structure that we had set previously. And so these are all jobs where once that water main gets done, this would be a good chance for us to use some of that street dollars to just redo the pavement one time. You're in, you're out, road is done. So that's a place where we could start to use some of that 800,000. So then I just wanted to put a map so that way everybody can kind of see this is work that we're doing all around the city. I mean, as much as those 3 areas were kind of newer areas, I mean, we're doing work everywhere. I mean, this doesn't even have the Hancock Bridge or the Gladewood Bridge involved. But, I mean, so we're going to be using some MFT funds as well as water money for Adams Street. And then we've got the Stevenson water main that needs to come in. So, I mean, we're trying to connect larger sections of the city here, take care of some of these main thoroughfares, as well as bring up some of our reconstructed roads that we need to, all while our street department will be picking off some of the little smaller red areas as we can moving forward. So that is what I would like to do with the next $8 increase. I'm standing by for questions.
Council?
Chair.
Alderman McClanathan.
Thank you. Looking back a few years ago when we implemented this, obviously we had the figure, you know, the 8, the 8, and the 8, and that was all just water at this time. Mm-hmm. We're talking here about maybe taking 6 of that last 8 and putting it towards other means. Within the last couple months, Manager Crow had mentioned, and we brought forward that basically up to $2 million a year in loans is now eligible for 75% forgiveness, whereas before, and I think it was up to a third forgiveness, or quarter or a third. Is that where we're getting our flexibility on this for that last increase?
That is part of the flexibility that we're getting to do this as we're going forward. That gives us the flexibility to get $2 million to go through and do water main. We cannot do sewer out of that. The forgiveness is not there, but the water main, and along with the lead service line replacement program that is in existence, which is a complete free program as we apply for that. So,
a follow-up, Chair.
Yes.
Because we, committed to, basically we said we've got, 40 years and we got about $200 million worth of work on that. It's both your representation and also Director Kapansky on this review that we are still going to be able to address all those projects under this framework.
If the state programs continue.
You mean the $2 million in the lead and that you're talking about? Can I continue?
Yes.
Okay. when, and I guess one thing I want to kind of assure is, so we're still going to be, you showed, I think, like 10 different road projects that were on there, and that's all on water. So we're still going to be on pace to continue to do the water main replacement schedule of doing, miles of pipe and miles of pipe and miles of pipe, and then all the other things that were on this plan that were presented within the last 6 months, correct?
These roads are the plan that was presented.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, excuse me, what was that again, Dennis? What did you just say?
I said these roads here are what was presented in that length of pipe that you were speaking of.
Thank you.
Alderman.
Oh, thanks. Now, the storm and obviously streets are not new issues, but however, they weren't addressed when we had these fee increases proposed to us a few years ago. Is it safe to say these are not new issues, that there was a plan to come back to us and ask us for more funding on this, or how are we going to address this outside of this formula?
So I don't believe that there was a good feeling for the condition of the roads across the city, because we did our first assessment here, and all everybody could do, look at, and know that we had issues with roads. We didn't really know the extent of which our issues were as we were going. However, there were things that were within the plan to come back and readdress additional increases for the wastewater treatment facility. There's some additional work that was going to be asked for later on when they initially presented to you the plan. Stormwater has just, I don't believe that the extent of some of the issues we've had with stormwater have come to light in the last year. Some of the problems where we have areas that are going to collapse, some of the flow, Dennis has been very aggressive, as has Tom, to look at what our stormwater issues are going forward. So at no place had we documented that we have all this storm water work going forward, that we have now put together and documented it. Would you agree with that, Tom?
Oh, yes, totally.
So we didn't realize the extent of what the stormwater. We cannot keep up with what we're doing or repair what we need to go forward unless we do something, somehow come up with money for stormwater.
One final question at this time, Chair.
Yes, Alderman.
So would it be a fair summary to say you took the 3 increases that we had in place, we've already implemented 2, and you're attempting to use the savings that we have under the current $2 million program, the other pipe, or the lead pipes, and use this already built-in increase to basically stretch our dollars to still implement the water program, but be able to adequately address our storm and our roads without coming back and, by the way, saying, hey, let's do our $8 increase, now let's put it all into water, and by the way, we want some more funding for roads and sewers. So you're trying to combine all 3 in this last increase, as opposed to just implementing the increase and then coming back to us for more rates later.
Yes, that's the goal. And the idea, we looked at what we can bond to really jumpstart the program for the roads. So,
Alderman Clem.
A couple things, I think, and Manager Crow, like you mentioned, 2 things, I guess, 2 big things are, number one,